Welcome back to Control Alt Lead, the podcast from computing where we talk to IT leaders about what is moving in the market. This week, I'm talking to Tom Clark, CTO at independent insurance broker Ardonagh Advisory. The overall Ardonagh group is absolutely massive. It employs more than 11,000 people, it's in more than 250 locations around the world, and it made more than 60 acquisitions last year alone. Ardonagh Advisory, Tom's division, has averaged one a month just this year. So it's a very smooth and practiced process. IT is integral to the whole thing. And Tom and I talked about the part that IT plays and how to make sure he, as a leader, has a seat at the table. It's a fantastic interview. Please enjoy. Tom, thanks so much for joining me today. Let's start off by chatting a little bit about Ardonagh and the acquisition model. So you do a lot of acquisitions there. So tell me about that.
We do an awful lot of acquisitions. I mean, Ardonagh Group is about 11,000 people. We're about 250 locations across the world. We do tailored insurance solutions to meet our client needs. Ardonagh Advisory, we have different platforms within that. So that's the part I work in is the advisory business, as you can tell from the background. And that's a key division focused on advice-led, community-focused insurance in the UK. So there's multiple brands in there, things like Towergate, Footman James, providing a wide range of services across SME commercial businesses through to specialist cover. And our growth strategy is really around kind of three areas. One being organic growth, one being about strategic acquisitions, and the other being about operational excellence. And I think as we talk about integrations and acquisitions, we're in the latter two of those. So choosing the right thing and then integrating them in the right way. Across the group, 2023, we did 67 acquisitions as a whole. So huge volume there. And if you ever look at our LinkedIn feed, you'll see regular announcements of those coming through. 2024, we've seen that continue. With regular announcements coming out. Probably the biggest recent one was PSC Insurance it was a deal out of Australia, valued at 2.3 billion Australian dollars. And so, in that part of the group, we're probably doing the one a month as a result of that.
Wow. So huge scale on acquisitions. I mean, I can think of businesses that go through one or two in multiple years.
Right.
But it sounds like you must have a real tried and tested system for acquisitions. So I'm going to ask you an IT specific question then.
Sure.
Being as this is an IT podcast, what do you consider essential for an IT leader? You're the CTO, of course, but a CTO, CDO, CIO. What do you consider essential for an IT leader to know or do to make an acquisition or acquisitions run smoothly?
So I think there's two parts in it. The first part is the due diligence, and it starts with the due diligence. Then once you've acquired the business, it's how does that acquisition onboard in a safe, secure, and resilient way. So for us, for me personally, I think an essential piece is that open dialogue and setting expectations up front. So if you've not talked about what the target future state looks like, you're leaving a gap for people to fill the message, to worry about it. So that open dialogue and set expectations. I think the other piece is about understanding the business context of that acquisition. Because if you're buying a wide variety of different business types, it's actually what matters to that business, what's important in their operating model, what makes them differentiate from their peers, why are we buying them essentially. So as you look at the estate, the PC estate is probably not strategic. The application estate, there may be some that are really key to that business model. And so it's about understanding that context of that business and what's important to it. So the essential for an IT leader is step out of the technology and understand that business element of it. And then I think the last piece is about understanding the gaps from where they are to where you want to be. So if you look across different organizations doing integration acquisitions, some of them will onboard and do nothing. Some of them will onboard and put some standards in place. We're at the other end of the scale, which is we onboard and we standardize as much as possible. So our control environment around running the enterprise estate or control environment around cyber, rather than trying to fix in situ, we work on the basis of onboarding onto our standard platform. And then wherever we see applications that are unique, special, and different, and driving part of the business context of that organization, then we will look at how do we manage that in our estate, but retain the uniqueness of that application.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I'd like to talk to you about that a little bit in a bit more detail, but we'll
Sure.
come back to it because you also mentioned something there about due diligence,
Yes.
which is, I think is very important. I remember back in sort of 2011, 2012 when the HP autonomy thing was going on,
Yes.
there was a lot talked about due diligence there. So
Yeah.
maybe you could expand on that a little bit. What part should IT specifically play in the due diligence aspect of an acquisition?
Yeah. And I think it's really around, it depends on the type of organization. So if the organization is a technology focused organization, or like in the HP autonomy piece, it's a very different beast in terms of that acquisition, because essentially the value of the IT is the value of the business. I think in businesses where IT is a support function and is delivering something to support the main aims of the business, it's a very different beast. And in that element, it's about how do you look at what's safe, secure, where are the things you need to worry about, where are the investments that you need to make in order to make sure that the asset that you're buying continues to retain value, and that the asset you're buying continues to drive growth. So I think it really, and the question, I think it really depends on the type of acquisition and the type of business you are, whether you are tech focused or business support focused.
Is there a difference in those types of acquisition where if you're acquiring somewhere a company, say, where IT is support versus where IT is strategic? Does that change the game at all?
I think it does. And when I look at an acquisition, we're looking at we're buying the business because the business has value, and the business adds creative value to us. It's about what is it I need to do with the technology to make sure it fits with our future strategy. So the key 4 tenets in our strategy are it's flexible, resilient, secure, and scalable. And those 4 pieces we look at. So it's how can I bring that organization into this? If I was looking at this from a technology organization, I'd need to do a much deeper due diligence on how well is if they've any bespoke applications, how well have they been constructed? Where are the technical debt areas? Where's the big investments coming in the future? What's the product roadmap if the product was the product of the company? So I think it does change it quite significantly.
Mm. Okay. When it comes to uh, making decisions about acquisitions,
Mm.
how do you ensure that IT has a seat at the table there?
Yeah. I think for me that hasn't been a problem. Technology recognized as being a key element of the consideration. And when I talk about technology, it's technology and cyber. So we look at both those elements. So for me, it wasn't. But if I was to consider what it would be like for someone who wasn't in that fortunate position, what I would talk to them about would be they need to engage with the people responsible for the acquisitions about the consequence of not involving them. And again, this comes back to talking business terms. So this isn't about which version of this or what capacity that is. They need to talk about what's this acquisition for, in terms of growth, in terms of future investment, and actually where do they need to consider that in the deal. So if you're picking up an application which has got limitations in terms of scalability, and your growth is to triple the size of the business, you've got a risk. You want to know that before you do the acquisition. So you want to do that in the DD piece. Another key piece is you'd want to know the investment that's required, because you're going to price a deal based on the value that you place on the company, the value you think you can drive. If there are things that require to be fixed, you want to be pricing that into the deal. So I think it's important that for companies that aren't, or for IT leaders that aren't in the position of having that engagement, it's about talking to the people who are doing the acquisitions and talking about the risk of not engaging them in their terms.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Okay, so in a hypothetical situation, I'm glad to hear Ardonagh gives you all the support and you
Yes,
have that sort of
yes,
seat at the table. But in a hypothetical situation, perhaps one of our listeners,
yeah,
um, uh, let's say that they don't have that seat at the table,
mm,
and they are trying to get it. Have you got
mm.
any advice for them in that situation? Like, how can they start moving forward and sort of getting the support of the business?
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be learned from past history. Um, and it's starting the dialogue, but playing out where acquisitions have gone wrong. Um, where the purchases have been made and it's been the wrong asset or it's been the wrong approach to integration. So I think it depends on the volume that a business is doing. If there's those internal case studies, but there's lots out there. So I think it's the scary tale of what could be without the involvement.
Scary tale. I quite like that. Um, okay, the last thing I wanted to ask you about there, Tom, is that you talked earlier about having a standardized approach.
Sure.
So I wonder if you can dig into that in a bit more detail. Is there a standard approach that you take to integration of
Yeah.
company IT post acquisition?
Yeah.
Because I'm assuming it must be a pretty smooth process by now.
Very much so, and it's something we've worked hard on to get into the right place. So we have an 8-stage process, believe it or not, that works through the due diligence and then into early acquisition and then through into integration. So effectively, through the acquisition stage, we'll walk through a series of questions. We'll make it simple for the acquiring business. Um, that we're working through a high level set of questions. We do it as a dialogue. It's about being curious and exploring those pieces in detail. Not spreadsheet based. Don't send the CEO of a company that you're buying a 200-page spreadsheet to fill in with version numbers. So it's about in that DD stage of what's the killer questions, what's the bits that would either make you not buy it, or you need to make sure that you're removing the risk as early as possible, or you're needing to price into the deal. So it's that curiosity in that early stage, but checklisted so that you can work it through. Immediately after acquisition, we'll work through our business standards. So it's more detail. It's into the next stage of granularity to work out, is there anything in this business today that we need to remediate quickly before we do a full integration? So it's about that. It's further due diligence, but it's not due diligence to make a choice. We work on the basis that we have a standard operating model. So our desktop estate, our network estate, etc. standard. So our approach is we onboard into that. And acquisitions are brought in rather than fixing them where they are. So anything that's fixed where they are purely the higher risk areas. Everything else remedied through integration. And what we look at is with the volumes that I talked about earlier, what we do is we look at a risk-based approach. So effectively, we factor in areas that around the level of risk of the individual items, the size of the company, the time it is since we purchased them, and we prioritize on a quarterly basis what's going to be remediated. So it's an ongoing piece. We have a factory approach for that onboarding. So we have a partner we work with who we can scale resources up or down. And literally it's a multi-step process that is repeatable, rinse and repeat. I
Mm.
think the only bit that's different to that is where there's an application, which is different. If it's a bespoke application or a vendor provided application that is special to that business, we will look at how do we bring that into our environment? How do we manage it in the same way? How do we make it, go back to the four words, scalable, resilient, secure and resilient. How do we make it in that way? And we will bring it into our cloud estate and manage it through that route. Sometimes that's not possible, but you do as much of it is viable there. Where an application isn't making a commercial differentiator, we'll bring them into the standard. So it's a very clear outcome-focused, risk-based approach to managing that integration.
Brilliant. I suppose I know I said that was going to be my last question, but one more occurred to me
Sure.
while you were talking there. how common is pushback when you're trying to, say, move people off the systems they've been working on for years and then onto a system that's more common in Ardonagh, and how are you handling that if you do get pushback?
That's a great question. And I think the point I mentioned earlier, it comes back to that. It's about setting expectations. So nobody wants the surprises. Nobody wants that down the line. So it's as soon as these things start to appear during the process, you flagging them, you forewarning, and then you've got a much smoother journey.
Brilliant. Tom, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll speak to you again very soon.
Thanks for the time.
Thanks for listening. Coming up later in this season, I'll be talking to IT leaders at Inchcape, Arm, and many, many more. As always, you can head to computing.co.uk for more IT leader interviews, research, and analysis. See you again soon.